Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud. Today we're in part 3 of Little Blue Book number 594, entitled The Overman by Upton Sinclair. And we are in part 3, and this is copyright 1924. So here we go. Okay, part 3, and we begin near the top of page 48. And we're off. My brother paused for a while. I did not speak. When I try to talk to you of these things, he said at last, I do not know where I stand. I find myself thinking of the brother I remember, who was content to call himself a materialist. You ask me what was this life that I speak of? Was it thought? Was it motion? Was it will? It was all, I think. Always it involved contemplation, the beholding of a universe of being, and the comprehending of it as an utterance of power. And always it was emotion, the flooding of one's being with an ocean tide of joy and exaltation. And always it was will. It was the concentration of all the powers of one's soul in one colossal effort. But chiefest of all, I think, and what is hardest even to hint at, it was the fourth and the highest of all the faculties of the mind. It was imagination. It is endless. That is the first thing that a man learns about it. It is the very presence of the infinite. And also he learns that it is at his command. That it is no accident, but his being itself. That he has put to call, and it comes. That he has but to knock, and it is opened unto him. It is that for which pilgrims and crusaders have fought, which prophets and saints have sung, and it is that, of course, which is the life of music. Music lies nearest to this mystery. To him who understands, it is the living presence of the Spirit. Its movement is the building up of that ecstasy. Its complexity is the infiniteness of that vision. All the fullness and the wonder and the glory of it are there. I give but my recollection of my brother's words. He paused again and sat gazing before him. I do not know, he said, how much these metaphors convey to you. A long time had passed, some 8 years, I imagine, though I kept no count of the time. I was coming bit by bit to a new and strange experience, one which is not of this life, and one which would seem to you, I imagine, as altogether supernatural. So, said Daniel, you must believe me as you can. I have spoken of strange bursts of vision, sudden gleams of insight, which shake one's being to its depth. Such experiences are not unusual. Poets have sung of them. But now there came to be something which, strange as it may sound, seemed to be not of a kind which my own soul, something which affected me with an indescribable fear. I fought against the thought, for I had no belief in the unseen. I strive to put into words something that cannot be put into words. But I was like a man groping in utter darkness and touching something alive. I had fought my way into this unknown land, and everywhere I had gone, so far, the things that I achieved were of my own power. The impulses were those of my own will. But now, day by day, I was haunted by the unthinkable suspicion that into my life was coming something that was not myself. I was a bird mounting upon the air, and the air had a will of its own. It was something that repelled me, something that drew me. I wrestled with the thought day and night, comparing it with anything of which I had ever heard or known, but in vain. It was new to me. These things of which I speak you must understand as happening in the midst of a tempest of emotions. I sat in a state which there is no imagining. I ate nothing for days. I sat for days without moving, until at last there came the climax, a desperate resolve, a mounting up, a battling with unseen forces, a knocking upon unseen doors, and then a sudden rending away of barriers and the inpouring of a sea of life. I can only use metaphors. I was a traveler, and I had toiled towards the sunrise, climbing peak upon peak, and suddenly I had stepped out upon the summit and stood transfixed with the glory of an endless vision of dawn. My brother's voice had sunk to a whisper, and his hand lay upon my arm. I cannot tell how his words had affected me. And this thing, I ventured, is it real? It is real, he said. There is nothing else so real. And is it a heaven? No, he said. It is another earth. I started. As a scientist, he said, what do you believe about the universe? Is there life throughout it? I do not know. It is a possibility. Yes, said Daniel. But for me, it is a certainty. It is a fact in which I live day after day. I had caught him by the arm. Daniel, I cried. It is just so, he said. Another planet? I do not know, was the answer. Another race of beings is all that I can tell you. And are they human beings? They have passed entirely beyond anything which those words can mean to me. And you know them? Yes. And personally? More than personally. How do you mean? I know them directly. I live in their lives. I know them as I know this symphony I hear, as one drop of water knows the sea. I was dazed. I could hardly think. And their name? I asked. They have no name, said my brother. They have no words. They have passed the need of language. They communicate with each other by immediate spiritual union. Their life is upon a higher plane than ours. They do not deal in ideas, but in imaginative intuitions. And then, Daniel, when you pass into that trance, it is that. It is that, he said. By an effort of my will, I lift myself into their consciousness, but because my physical and mental faculties have not been prepared for long ages of development, my time with them is limited, and I fall back to recruit my strength. And this has been going on for years? For 10 or 12 years, was his reply. It will, perhaps, be best for me to give the substance of what he told me in the long conversation which ensued. I do not know where these people are, he told me. I only know that throughout universal space they are the race which is nearest in its development to our own. I do not know what they look like. I have never seen nor heard them. I only live their lives. I do not ask them any questions. Our relation is nothing of that sort. It is as if they were playing music which I heard, but also as if their music was their whole life, so that I know all they have and do. Their presence comes to me as the indwelling of universal joy, of love and worship and rapture, unending and unthinkable, their life is infinite variety. Immediate and perpetual expansion. Spiritual insight, developing in a ratio determined by the will of the individuals. It is as if a man were to witness the springtime arising of nature, but taking place in an hour instead of 3 months, and he comprehending it not from the outside, but living it as a bursting forth of song. And to this song there is no limit? I ask him. When you speak of the soul as being infinite, said Daniel, you do not mean that it extends merely beyond your thoughts, but you mean that you may heap quantity upon quantity and multiply quantity by quantity in any ratio and at any speed you please, and still have infinitely before you. You mean that those beings understand what is going on in each other's mind? They understand all minds as you understand your own. It is of the nature of spiritual passion to mingle at a certain stage of intensity, like electricity in the lightning flash. This race has developed a new sense, just as a man has developed senses which are not possessed by lower animals. And these people were once men? Presumably. And then they have escaped altogether from the sorrows of life? Say rather, he answered, that they have escaped to the sorrows of life. The essence of life is sorrow. It does not seem so from your picture, I said. That is simple because my picture is not understood. Every one of these beings of whom I speak bears in his bosom a pain for which there is no words. Every one of them. There are countless numbers of them, living each in my consciousness as the voice of one instrument lives in a symphony. Each one is a Titan spirit, wrestling day and night without end, without possibility of respite, and bearing on his shoulders turning the page is very difficult. And bearing on his shoulders, I don't think I got the right page. There we go. Bearing on his shoulders, come on, you can do it. This page hasn't been turned in a long time. And bearing on his shoulders a universal load of woe. In no way could you imagine one better than as a soldier in the crisis of the battle, panting and blind with pain, dying amid the glory of his achievement. And such a life, I cried. Why do they live it? They live it because it demands with the voice of all their being to be lived, because the presence of it is rapture and utterable holiness, because it will allow no questions, because it is instant, imperative, and final. It will be lived. I sat in silence. Do I gather from your words, I asked, that immortality is not one of the privileges of this race? He smiled again. The spiritual life, he said, does not begin until the thought of immortality is flung away. A man's duty looms up before him, and in his weakness he will not do it, but puts the fruition of his life into another world where the terms are not so hard. This people, I asked, what do they know about God? They know no more than men do, was the answer, except that they know nothing. They know that the veil is not lifted. It is not that for which they seek. Life is their task, and life only, to behold its endless fruition, to dwell in the beauty of it, to wield power of it, to toil at its whirling loom, to build up palaces of music from it. Ah, my brother, why have you never lived a symphony? These people have no physical life, I asked. Pardon me. Assuredly they have, was his answer. It is a life which does not enter their consciousness, any more than for instance, the beating of your heart and the renewing of your tissues. They have attained a mastery over the world of matter. They temper the seasons to their wish. Disease and ill health they have banished entirely. And understanding the ways of nature, they create their food at will. And their society knows no rich, no poor. Their government? They have no government, he said. Their law is their inspiration. Until far into the night we sat talking, and then early in the morning, as I went out upon the beach, I saw a ship standing in towards the shore. I recall, as if it were yesterday, how my heart leaped up, and with an agony of uncertainty I stood waving a signal. And then I rushed to see my brother, shouting the news aloud. Startled with his own thoughts, he gazed at me in perplexity. "A ship has come," I cried. "A ship," he echoed, and then with a sudden light, "Oh, I see." "Come," I cried, "they will take us aboard." But my brother shook his head. "No, Edward," he replied, "I cannot do that." I started. "No," he said again, "do not ask me. You go, but let me stay here until the end." "What can you mean?" I cried. "Can you really suppose that I would leave you?" "I am fitted to travel," he said. "I do not wish to change. And I could not face the thing which you call civilization. It has no interest for me." "But we can live in the country," I cried. "I have money. Nothing need trouble you." But all my arguments made no impression upon him. He would only repeat that he desired to be left alone. I tried to move him by saying that I would not leave him. "I might stay if I choose," he said. He could not help that. But if I were wise, I would leave him to his own life, and I would not subject him to the pain of meeting the strangers upon the ship. They would not understand, and they would only cause him vexation. And then, while I was protesting with him, we heard the shouts of men upon the shore. He rose up and laid his hand upon my shoulders and kissed me upon the forehead, saying, "Be wise, or let me be wise for you. Respect my judgment, and let me go." And so he turned and started away toward the center of the island. At the edge of the thicket he turned and waved his hand to me. I never saw him again. And that is the end of the Overman, Little Blue Book number 594.